Good evening. I would like to call our special council meeting to order at 6 p.m. Good evening to colleagues on council. To my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, Mayor McNeil-Smith, Councillor Rintoul, Councillor O'Keefe, and to my far left, Councillor Novick. Good evening to staff attending the meeting this evening. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Humble, our Corporate Officer, Ms. Nelson, Director of Finance, Mr. Hissick, our Director of Engineering, Parks and Work, Ms. Clary, our Director of Development Services, Ms. Verhagen, our Director of our Director of Community Planning, Mr. Newcomb, and our Manager of Communications, Ms. Judson. Good evening to members of the public in attendance here in the chamber who may be watching the webcast. I will now turn to a territorial acknowledgement and want to acknowledge with respect that we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanish Nations, and we express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands and waters for millennia, and I also acknowledge the important relationship that the Wasanish people continue to have with the lands today and into the future. In turning to approval of the agenda, if I could have a mover and seconder for that our agenda be approved as presented.
Do we have any amendments for late conditions? Just for late communications?
If
no?
we can have it moved and seconded, we can then
So
amend.
moved?
Yeah.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No, just I wondered if we had any late items that came in that. Okay.
There are no late items. I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. We're now turning to our regular public participation period where we allow members of the public to come forward and address council. We ask that when you do come forward to provide your name and the municipality you reside in, and ask that you keep your remarks to 4 minutes. And for a first time, is there anyone wishing to come forward this evening? Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of council.
Just your microphone, Mr. Lindholm. Thanks.
Yep, my name is Mark Lindholm, 2060 Birch Road in Sydney. That's not my residential address, but that's the address to which I'm going to speak. Matter before you today is a report from the APC in connection with our proposed now third try at the building at 2060 Birch Road, a 60-unit residential only, no commercial building that has been modified from previous plans that you've seen in order to eliminate all variances except for one relating to location of parking slots on the east side of the property, which you may recollect from previous plans, has a 4-foot rock wall and then very mature trees blocking it from the only immediately adjacent development. So in other words, completely unaffecting them in any way whatsoever. I'd ask you to please have a look at the APC recommendations, which we support, put the matter to staff to prepare a rezoning bylaw, and I'd also request, having regard to the fact that we've already gone through 2 public hearings, that we comply with the OCP, that there are no variances, that the matter be, that you request, or at least you resolve not to have a public hearing in connection with this matter. We're now over 2 years in this process, and it's time, in our view, to get the matter settled. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Lindholm. We appreciate you coming forward this evening. I will note that when we come to the matter on the agenda, I will be turning to Mr. Humble to make reference to the process going forward from tonight's resolutions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, we do have you listed under presentations this evening. So this is a general. I know I know we're keen to have you. I'll just turn if any other members of the public would like to come forward. And for our final time, is seeing no further speakers, we'll close public participation, and now happy to turn to our first presentation this evening on the blue economy supporting innovation and growth. And I'm pleased to welcome Jason Goldsworthy, Center for Ocean Applied and Sustainable Technologies, also known as COAST, and Mr. Alex Rueben from the Association of BC Marine Industries. Welcome, gentlemen. You have the floor, your presentation for up to 10 minutes, and we'd be pleased if you would take questions after that.
Okay.
And there is the button for the mic there.
All right. Do I have to tell you where I came from, or no? Okay, but I am proud that our association, though representing Western Canada and British Columbia in particular, is based here in Sydney, right at the end of Beacon Avenue. So we're happy business members of the community. I represent the Association of British Columbia Marine Industries. We've been around about 7 years. We represent what we call the industrial marine sector in British Columbia, and that ranges through what we call 6 subsectors, ranging from shipbuilding, ship repair, small craft marine products, industrial marine services, professional marine services, and ocean science and technology. And so in total, that represents about 1,100 companies that make up that breadth of the sector that we represent. About $7.2 billion worth of output, 23,000 jobs directly employed, 35,000 jobs sustained. And our association, in terms of membership, has about 280 members, ranging from large multinationals to small one-person outfits. And I would say about 90% of our membership is what we call small and medium enterprises. And about 20% of our membership ranges right across the country to Newfoundland. So what is it we do? We essentially create business opportunities for our members with their products and services, and get them into other markets. We connect and network our industry through a series of events in person, more and more so now these days. We have a large annual event that we do in Vancouver each year, and about 350 delegates. We help attract and grow a skilled workforce. That probably is the #1 issue for our companies these days in terms of job vacancies. And we certainly are very much focused on getting underrepresented demographics. And so in the last couple of years, we've put out specific campaigns for youth, women, Indigenous people, and new Canadians. And so we have specific strategies. And if you check out our website, www.abcmi.ca, you'll see that we have career paths and specific targeted strategies at these underrepresented demographics. We very much promote and enable new technologies and innovation in the ocean and marine space, and we helped start the Center of Ocean and Applied Sustainable Technologies, and with my colleague here, Jason, tonight, and he'll talk about that. We connect our companies to federal and provincial government programs and funding opportunities, and we do a fair bit of representation and advocacy for the marine sector. We also represent our businesses offshore, both in national and in international context. And as you can imagine, across those 6 subsectors, there's quite a few events in the world that we go to, usually putting either a like participation for the West Coast in the Canada Pavilion or in BC pavilions if it's large enough. I want to talk briefly about the Blue Economy strategy because I know that's come up. There is no blue economy strategy. We hope that there would be one, a Canadian blue economy strategy. And very quickly, blue economy means the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of the ocean ecosystem. So it's largely a sustainability approach with the ocean economy. And so in the absence of that, we, with the BC government, built the BC Maritime Industry Strategy, and I'll leave a copy of that here for Council so that you can see it. And with that came a $25 million grant, which we're now executing over the next 2 years to support the growth of maritime infrastructure in British Columbia. Presence of our industry here in the town of Sydney is actually quite pronounced. So, you know, companies like Titan Boats, Shockwave, EMCS, JR Marine, Axis Technologies, Liquid Metal Marine, Phil Brooks, and others are all in your industrial park. And so certainly when it comes to ideas about Sydney, I've read through your economic plan and the portion that really pertains to ocean and marine. And so certainly the Sydney Industrial Park is something I'd like to continue to leverage for our companies, and whether it's there that they set up their manufacturing facilities, engineering, or simply warehousing as well. The Sydney In-Water Boat Show is something that we work with BC Boating Association, and we'd like to sort of leverage that event to maybe go and look at other marine products, like a mini trade show, and also maybe some sort of next forum around new innovation and new technologies in the marine and ocean space. So I think there's real possibilities there. Jason will talk about maybe some of the marine test areas in partnership with Coast that we could maybe look at in this vicinity, or getting together ocean and marine companies, and then also holding maybe marine outreach events at the Mary Winspear Center, that we could do, because we do that elsewhere in BC. So I don't want to crowd my colleague, so I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alex. Evening, everyone. My name's Jason Goldsworthy, the Executive Director for Coast. I appreciate the time today, and thank you, Alex. I think you've covered most of the things I was going to explain about some of the blue economy stuff, but one of the things that Coast is very focused on is that new technology side of things. So just a little bit about Coast to start with. Coast is the Centre for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technologies. It's actually an initiative of the South Island Prosperity Partnership, Greater Victoria's Economic Development Agency. And it was started out of what are the new economies that are going to be burgeoning coming out of the pandemic, and one of those was this notion of the blue economy. And I must admit, I had to look up the blue economy before I started in this about what it actually is. But I think Alex gave a really good explanation of what the blue economy stands for. I like to think of it more as well as in treating our oceans as assets rather than resources. Assets are something that you manage, you nurture, you work with, and a bit like a building asset, where a resource is something you take and extract from. So it's a really positive approach to the way we're working with our oceans in the future. So Coast is here really to support the growth of the blue economy in BC and in this region. And really we look at it I look at it to serve three main constituents. One is our industry. We've got some fantastic industry partners and industry companies in BC and this region. Alex has gone through a number of those. And we want to see those industries grow and innovate, come up with new technologies, move forward towards that more sustainable approach to the oceans. The second constituency is individuals. People find this a very positive, attractive sector to get into. So we're appealing to individuals that may be in different sectors to come over to the blue economy through a number of ways, including training programs, through some of the research, through the academic and training providers here in BC, and really attract that talent, as Alex talked about. If we're going to grow this economy into the $3 trillion worldwide economy that it's tipped to be by 2030, then we need to get more people into the sector, and it's a very positive sector to be part of. The big one for Coast, though, is our innovators. We need people to come up with new ideas, new concepts. We're actually, Canada and this region is actually very good at coming up with intellectual property, but sometimes that IP is taken elsewhere to be further developed. We need that IP to be nurtured here and these companies to grow and flourish. Our research, academic research, UVic, UBC, BCIT are doing a lot of research in this sector, but a lot of times, unfortunately, that work and that intellectual property is taken away. So Coast is really here to support those new innovators and those new technology companies get a grasp and work into the sector. So how are we doing that? There's four main action areas that we're focused on. The first one is really supporting those innovators through access to capital, looking at different investment ideas about how to give them the pathway to develop their technologies, and that's connection with the industry as well. The second one I mentioned before is the training. They need trained people. All these innovators need additional access to talent. The third one, and probably the more interesting one, is access to testing and demonstration facilities. If we're going to attract companies here to test and develop their technology so it can be exported to the world, they need places for that to happen, and that can be difficult. It needs water access. We need infrastructure in that place to help them and support them. And the final one is raising the profile. There's some incredible work that's already going here. I think it goes unnoticed a little bit. I think we need to increase that profile a little bit so it will attract companies in and also support those companies willing to grow. So the opportunities to me are that this area and this region should be the place that companies seek out to grow new technologies in the blue economy and supporting the existing ones that are already innovating in that space. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the presentation, gentlemen. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor O'Keefe?
Sure, I'll start. Thanks very much for the presentation. First, I guess just building on Jason's last point about this area and the blue economy. Any thoughts, either you or Alex, in terms of what do you see as some of the local assets in terms of Sydney that lends us to being a good location for a blue economy hub or area? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can start and pass it over to Alex as well. Definitely, I mentioned before, infrastructure, access to the water. There's a lot of opportunities here, especially with some of the incredible marine companies you've got in marine industries. Alex mentioned Phil Brooks and Van Oil Marinas. You've got marinas. You've got actual maintenance facilities, all that. So you've already got that. The second one, the other asset you have is those companies doing that work already. And there's also these secondary industries that support blue economy technologies. There's manufacturing, there's logistics, and all that exists already in Sydney as far as I'm aware. So I think those assets are right here ready for that to grow from.
Yeah, without maybe wading into some sort of sensitive topics, the place that I go by every day is the Anacortes Ferry Terminal, and one of the things that we've been looking for Coast is not just a virtual presence but a physical presence in terms of co-location of companies, access to water, and that is a superb location, if only even for a temporary village of innovation and testing and access to water. So that was one thing that comes to mind. Some of the other things that I mentioned already in my very brief presentation, but you do have a real concentration of maritime companies here, and then co-location, Pat Bay, the innovation or the Institute of Ocean Sciences, Ocean Networks Canada, they're all close by. And so the actual Saanich Peninsula is rife with marine companies, and there's actually a disproportional representation of especially the ocean science and technology companies on the Saanich Peninsula. So there's real potential here.
Great. One of the actions in our ECDEV strategy is to develop a local industry profile for the marine sector. So there's a better understanding of retention, expansion, and attraction opportunities in the marine sector. Is this something that you guys have already, or you might be working on, or would be interested in, helping to put something like that together?
If you actually get a chance later on to look at the BC Maritime Industry Strategies, there's 4 pathways, and amongst other things, they look at workforce development and innovation and new technologies, as well as building up the marine infrastructure and increasing business opportunities. So the framework is already there. It doesn't need to be developed. We've got it, and it just really means, I think, taking part within that framework, both on the federal and provincial sides, in furthering the marine sector here.
I'll take a break and let.
No, that's okay. I think.
Okay. So one other kind
Sorry,
of.
Jason, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as part of working with the ecosystem and looking at what companies are trying to grow and build up their profile, one thing we're looking at doing is mapping what those assets and interested parties and people involved in the ecosystem are as well. And it's work that Dallas Gislason from the South Island Prosperity Partnership is working on through as well. And that's something that where I think Sydney could be part of as we move forward on that.
Yeah, that's great. What I've heard from a few businesses in the sector is that as it grows, a lot of them don't know who else is in their sector, and so they would like to know who else is doing this sort of work within the marine sector, so that, you know, they can network or collaborate or that, so it sounds like you guys are working on that.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, and it's one of the things, actually, going from my personal approach. I was involved in the ocean sector about 7 or 8 years ago, and it felt very lonely. So it's kind of nice to know that there's others out there involved in this and having the same challenges. So I think that it's a very valuable tool that we're working towards putting together.
Great, okay. I'll leave it there for now. But
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. Mr. Goldsworthy, you mentioned about this being an attractive site for innovation and testing. I remember from previous years, the Chamber of Commerce did a tour of industry and identified a lot of industry in here that are doing those innovative things. Why do you think this is, why Sydney? Why would they come here?
I can talk from my experience and also from the work I've been doing over the last few months, and that is that there's a few things that sort of encourage these sorts of innovative sort of hubs and testing locations and that attraction. One is access to the infrastructure we've talked about, and the fact there's other companies already working in that sector. Two is the access to water, but it's also more than that. It's also protected water versus exposed water. So there's opportunities to have both that in this location, and I can talk from being a boater here myself that, you know, there's great opportunities for different testing ecosystems or natural ecosystems around here. But I think probably the most attractive part as well is it brings together a bit of a community as well. So that community of innovation, and it's not out in the middle of nowhere. There's, you know, it's connected. It's a connected place as well. So I think that's what makes Sydney a very attractive location to encourage that to occur. If that answers your question.
Thank you, it does, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Seeing no other, Councillor O'Keefe.
thanks. Just getting to, you talked about raising, you know, profile, which I think is great. So for Jason, my understanding is that because the town is already a member of SIP, that once you get you're working on your membership packaging currently, that we will automatically be Coast members, or will we have to sign up and do something else?
Yes, we are. In fact, we're working through that in the next few weeks, actually, on our membership. So we're still trying to plan out their membership structure, but it'll be more like a community partnership type approach, and through the involvement with SIP and the fact that it's part of what Coast and the Coast is an initiative of SIP, then Sydney would have part of that community partnership. So. Okay,
and a question for Alex then on the topic of membership for ABCMI. Can municipalities be members of ABCMI, and what would be sort of advantages?
I mean, the thing is with municipalities, we see you as sort of as enterprises, and so, but not as businesses per se. So we have an associate membership that's $500 a year. And basically what we do with you is we help you with your economic development plans in furthering, obviously, the marine sector within your jurisdiction. And anything else that you might be doing, especially attracting people in terms of jobs and youth, women, and others, you know, into marine jobs here. And as I said, you know, we have all these marine businesses here. They all have job vacancies, you know, and so really what we're trying to do is bring more people here. And they're growing. And just to give you an idea, Titan Boats, I visited them today. 2 years ago, they had 23 employees. Now they have 47. And they're continuing to grow. So there's more and more jobs in this area. Great.
And just one more, I think, for both of you. I'm just curious about the funding. So I know, so Alex, you're there now. I know you received some funding from the provincial government. And what sort of businesses is that going out to? And
That's
behind that?
the $25 million grant program, and it's going out to essentially small shipyards, boatyards, boat manufacturers, and so there's actually a couple of, I can't tell you yet who's got the agreements, we're about to roll them out this week, but there's a couple in this jurisdiction that are actually getting and benefiting from that and increasing their capacity, capability in terms of their manufacturing capacity, and making them more competitive. And they're getting substantial funding through our grant program.
Okay, and then for Jason, just, I recall that you received some federal funding.
Yes.
But I'm not exactly sure what that involves and how you will put that to use out here.
Yeah, so there's federal funding through Pacific Can in terms of the catalyst or the first 3-year phase of Coast. And there's also funding through the BC Energy Mines and Low Carbon Innovations Ministry as well. And the funding is there to support the growth of these companies and the establishment of these companies, so programming to support those companies. It's also there to look for potential capital opportunities for infrastructure development as well, and also shared equipment and assets that can be used by multiple companies. So that shared work area, shared co-working facilities, but also shared equipment, there's that funding to support that.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Novick.
Thank you, gentlemen. Very good presentation. I have a long, well, not a very long history with the marine sector, and I'm very excited to see how this plays out in the long run. But a very quick double question. Are you working with any Indigenous companies or nations at the present time? And how do you see the role of the Indigenous communities in the evolution of the blue economy, especially on the peninsula?
Great question. And in fact, if you, I'll leave, like as I said, to leave the strategy here, you'll see in it are priorities against each of the pathways that we're pursuing. And a lot of those priorities involve bringing Indigenous businesses into the fold and working with Indigenous communities in terms of advancing the interests of those communities and the businesses resident within them. We are currently working with Musqueam in Vancouver. We're working with the Souk First Nation out here on the peninsula, and we're looking at sort of furthering our relationships. And so, for instance, just a very quick example, there's a federal project now to get rid of derelict vessels. And that project, essentially the decision loop in terms of awarding those contracts goes through the Indigenous communities. And if not the Indigenous communities, the viable contractors that are going to deliver those services have to have Indigenous benefit plans. And so we're working with those companies in creating the Indigenous benefit plans, but first off, trying to really encourage the Indigenous businesses to take part in the opportunities that are available both through federal and provincial governments and with defense acquisition contractors and others.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. And I just have one question. I first wanted to acknowledge Dallas Gillison, that's here from SIP this evening, and I know has been involved with the establishment of Coast. My question is we certainly appreciate through our long-standing relationship with SIP the partnership that the municipalities have with that economic generator, if you will. And it sounds like your respective organizations' relationships are predominantly with provincial and federal. Councillor O'Keefe's question touched on it a little, but can you elaborate any further on, is there relationships per se between your organizations and local governments, the municipalities?
Yeah, I can add, absolutely. I mean, obviously the municipalities are going to play a big part in whatever Coast is working on, especially when it comes to facilities and infrastructure. And we see that as also part of the economic development strategies that the municipalities have. So, yeah, the working relationship will stay strong on that one in terms of what those positions will be. I think we'll look. Coast does have a BC mandate, but it's been created here in Greater Victoria and will be rooted here for the future. So we want to work closely with all the community partners that we have to make sure that, and it comes back to that membership structure and that community partnership about how we actually formalise that partnership moving forward. But it definitely be very close, especially with the infrastructure and any sort of development of facilities. That answers your question.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, in my past incarnation, I created an industrial marine training facility in the Esquimalt and sort of developed a very close relationship with the township of Esquimalt and so on onwards. Have worked with the Esquimalt in their economic development activity. Also with the city of North Vancouver, the district of North Vancouver, which houses Seaspan and other shipbuilding companies. And so certainly now looking at Port Alberni, Sydney, and others, really with a marine connection in developing and continuing to do those. So while you're absolutely right, Mayor, that we have very strong federal and provincial connections. We're really now sort of trying to again reestablish our connections with the municipalities that are relevant to our sector.
That's great. Well, Alex Rueben and Jason Goldsworthy, thank you very much for your presentation this evening and taking our questions. And thank you for being in our community.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I were to leave something behind, who would I do that?
Actually, if you'd like to forward it electronically to staff@admin@sydney.ca, that can be circulated to council, all members of council.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to, and you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave to do other things. Thank you. We'll now turn to our second presentation this evening on the Parkland Needs Assessment, and I'll be turning the floor over to Corey Newcomb, our Director of Community Planning. Corey.
Just back up to the beginning here. It's on. Good evening. So tonight I'm here to talk about the Parkland Needs Assessment. Next slide, please. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so today, just a quick outline of the presentation I'd like to give. Just looking at the introduction and purpose of what this document discusses. Take a quick look at Sydney's park network as it stands now and some of the current conditions around that network. Quick look at the future conditions and then some findings and recommendations. Next slide, thanks. Yeah, so generally I guess just a statement about parkland and communities. It's, I think, an essential part of communities as everybody acknowledges. There's many studies that talk about the importance of it in terms of human health, both physical and mental health, and it's especially in communities like Sydney where there's maybe a higher proportion of multifamily living, so apartments and townhouses, and people maybe have less access to green spaces in those types of housing situations, and so access to parkland outside becomes especially important. Parkland needs assessments like this document are a common feature of most parks master plans. Due to the budget in Sydney's 2018 Parks Master Plans, it wasn't possible to include this feature. But this type of document is really a precursor to a lot of DCC bylaw updates because it does talk about the supply of park and future park improvements. So it's a pretty critical step, and heading toward the DCC bylaw update as we are now, staff thought it would be a good time to undertake one of these assessments. And so the purpose of the report is to review best practices around parkland supply, assess it for Sydney specifically, identify any gaps, and then look at some opportunities for expansion if warranted. Thanks. So a quick look at Sydney's park network. Sydney overall is 511 hectares, or 5.1 square kilometers. There's 23, I think, 0.43 hectares of parks in Sydney, spread across 27 parks. And the document also looked at some adjacent North Saanich parks as well, just to make sure that any parks that are accessed by Sydney residents on a regular basis are factored in as well. Next slide. The document also divides Sydney's parks into 4 broad categories, and this was discussed a bit last week as well. So destination parks, neighborhood parks, nature, linear parks, and green space are kind of the 4 big categories you'll see in this type of document. These are not hard and fast sort of categories. There's a lot of overlap between them. Destination parks can easily serve as neighborhood parks as well. Green space can fulfill some of the nature linear park functions or neighborhood park functions as well. So they're just sort of broad categories to look at the role of the park, typically related to its size and location as well. And quick look at past parkland acquisition and investment in Sydney. So in the 15 years between 2006 and 2022, the town invested about $9 million in parks. A lot of this was in some of the larger parks classified as destination parks like Tallista and Iroquois. Some of the money for this came from grant funding, and some came from development contributions as well. The most recent direct acquisition of park land in Sydney was in 1999 with expansion of Eastview Park. I believe the town bought a single family property there. And in 2018, that was the most recent addition to parkland through subdivision, and that was Markinch Place, pictured here. Just a small pocket park on the corner there. So typically parkland needs assessment reference some broad standards and targets for parkland supply and acquisition. And generally these fall into 3 categories. So one is area-based, where you look at parkland supply as a measure, percentage of the town's or municipality's overall land area. Population-based, so it's a per capita measure, and generally it's measured in hectares per 1,000 residents or population. And then spatially based, which is more of a mapping exercise, looking at it from a geographic perspective. So looking at the area-based analysis method, some common targets out there that you'll quite often see quoted in this kind of study are 12%, 17%, or 30% of a municipality's land base being dedicated to parkland. Those are sort of big, broad, aspirational targets. Sydney is not close to any of these. We've got 4.6% of our land base is municipal park, and that goes up to 5.9% if you include school district lands. Typically, this type of study does not include non-municipal parklands, so regional, provincial, or national parks are generally not included. They solely look at municipal parkland. And the reason for that is because really the town or municipalities have very little control over land that's not their own parkland. A case of this might be in 2014, I think, 2012 maybe, when the old school district site, middle school site was sold. So looking at these 12%, 17%, and 30% measures and how far Sydney is away from those measures, I think that's really to be expected. Those 12, 17, and 30% measures are really more developed on a national or provincial basis, where you have very large land areas. Typically they refer to national or provincial parks, where you've got these quite broad expanses of very natural land. They also include natural space preservation. And British Columbia is, I think, actually getting close to 30% or has achieved 30%. So it is possible on that kind of provincial level. In an urban area like Sydney, these are not appropriate measures. Sydney is just too urbanized. Things are very compact, and achieving those type of measures is just not realistic. And an example of that, to achieve even the 12% would require more parkland than the town already has. So 38 hectares, which is just not realistic. Moving to the population-based or per capita analysis, some potential targets. So there's a broad target out there put forward by the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association of 4 hectares per 1,000 residents. Again, I think this is not realistic for an urban community like Sydney. It's just too high, and more realistic would be something from the UK that's referred to as the 6-acre standard, or 2.4 hectares per 1,000 residents. And I think that does fit with the UK, where you've got a lot of development historically, and some of the towns and villages are quite compact. So it's, I would say, more in line with sort of Sydney's urban context. And then staff also looked at just a straight 2 hectare per 1,000 people target, which is just a 5% over the existing. And so what is existing? It's 1.9 hectares per 1,000 residents for municipal park only. If you include school district 63 land, it goes up to 2.4 hectares per 1,000 residents. And as mentioned, Sydney doesn't have any regional, provincial, or national parks. So getting to these, say, the moderate goal and the stretch goal are realistic. So to get to the moderate goal in current circumstances would require an extra 1.2 hectares of land, and the stretch goal 6.1 hectares. And then moving on to the spatial analysis. So this looks at parkland relative to people's location to it. So a walking distance, typically it's a 400-meter distance that's used in this type of analysis, and this is consistent with transit proximity analysis as well. So 400 meters is generally the distance that the average person would walk on a regular basis to access something near their home. We also looked at 200 meters, and this is to account for people with maybe reduced mobility, so someone with a walker or perhaps walking with small children, and being able to access park within the same general time frame. So if you look at the map and look at the light pink, Sydney actually has pretty good coverage. I would say a good 70-80% of the town is covered, and people can access park within a decent time frame. A little less so for the 200-meter measure, but again, decent coverage, and a lot of the homes in Sydney are in close proximity to park. So this analysis did find 4 gaps. The first one is just north of the downtown, so sort of from James White Boulevard up to about Henry. Also probably the highest residential density in the community in that area, and not a lot of parkland. The closest park to that area would be the Rose Garden. The second gap is actually 3 sort of areas that we call the northern waterfront areas, so the Shore Acres neighborhood, the All Bay neighborhood, as well as the Beaufort Peninsula. And all 3 of these neighborhoods have no park in close proximity to most of the residents. The west side on sort of the Gallery neighborhood in the industrial area is another gap. There's a small park over there. It's not actually on town-owned land. It's on MOTI highway right-of-way. And it does provide a little bit of recreational space over there, but definitely not enough for the entire area. And then downtown. So this is sort of building on the idea of sort of a central plaza or park space in the downtown that's been in the OCP for quite a long time. And it's a bit of a gap in the center of the downtown area there. So this table just looks at, summarizes all that information, does break it out into the park type as well. As you can see in this center cell there, the biggest proportion of Sydney's parkland is in neighborhood park, and then next is destination and nature linear parks. So a fairly good mix of park types. We also undertook an overview of Sydney in relation to some peer communities. And peer communities is defined as having one characteristic that's within a 25% similarity to Sydney's, so whether that be land area, population, et cetera. And you can see the communities that we've compared in the left-hand side of the column there. And generally, I would say from an area-based perspective, Sydney is pretty consistent with those other communities. So you can see Sydney's at 5% of its total land area as parkland, and the range is sort of from, probably median sort of from 5 to 8% there. A couple of outliers at 2 and 3, but generally Sydney's in there as a pretty average community. In terms of per capita though, so the hectares per 1,000 residents, Sydney is definitely on the lower side. So that's the left-hand graph there with Sydney at the bottom. Definitely below many island and other communities. Next slide, please. We also looked at some neighborhoods and breaking Sydney down into neighborhoods based on population areas with census data, and looked at some of the areas that on a localized level have good supply and less supply of parkland. So areas of good supply would be Rest Haven, Melville, Tallista, Iroquois, the Ray Grant area, Maryland, where you have maybe relatively low population compared to the amount of parkland, or you've got larger historical parks that have been there for quite a while. Some gaps in the network are areas with low park supply, All Bay, the Melissa Central area, Shore Acres, Swiftsure, and the downtown and west side as well. We also looked at future growth. So in the OCP and the regional growth strategy, some work done by Statistics BC and the CRD themselves looked at a potential future population for Sydney of just over 14,000 people 15 years from now in 2038. And this potential population was then using a development potential method, so looking at where new housing units might go, was divided out into these neighborhoods in Sydney. And based on that, the downtown and the west side area would have the highest potential growth, and then other neighborhoods would receive some growth as well. So what effect does this growth have on future parkland supply in Sydney? Well, from an area-based analysis perspective, there would be no change because it's just a straight percentage of parkland compared to the overall community size. Spatial analysis perspective, basically it shows you that the areas with the highest growth are already areas with lower levels of parkland. And on a per capita basis, because this really is a population metric, per capita basis, this future growth would lead to a decrease on a per capita basis for parkland supply. So we've got 1.9 hectares now. By 2038, with that population growth, that would decrease 13% to 1.67 hectares per 1,000 people. And some of the areas that would have maybe higher growth and already have less parkland would be more affected. So Melissa Central, downtown, the Beaver Rathdown Parks area, and the west side as well. So looking into some key takeaways, future growth in the community and past growth as well has not always been evenly distributed, and parkland distribution as well historically has been concentrated in residential focused areas, and areas like downtown that were historically only commercial, didn't have any parkland or very little parkland. So you see a disparity from that perspective. Catchment areas in Sydney that already have a low parkland supply will absorb future growth, and we'll see a further decrease as a result of that growth. And by planning ahead, we can attempt to counter this decrease and meet the community's parkland needs into the future. So running through some findings and recommendations. The first finding is that generally, despite its context even, Sydney does have a somewhat low supply of parkland. It is consistent with other communities in some respects, but it is generally below most commonly accepted standards for parkland supply. And the recommendation is to look at some potential acquisition going into the future to help counteract that growth that we're expecting. Second finding is that generally the town does not have any significant financial reserve to pursue any parkland acquisitions, so that's something to look at going forward through the DCC bylaw and other financial mechanisms if council does decide at some point to look at some parkland acquisition. The third finding is just looking at internal capacity and making sure that there's a clear set of policies and procedures to guide any property or park acquisitions going forward. The fourth finding is just that these areas that will see higher population growth, so that's generally the downtown area and the west side area, will also have the largest parkland deficit. And that's partially for historical factors, where because of the nature of uses in the past, their parkland dedication was not a priority. So looking at these areas to, as they grow, pursue some sort of acquisition for parkland as a higher priority is the recommendation there. And then finally, spatial analysis showed some notable gaps in the park network, and looking to fill some of these gaps going forward as a recommendation to that. So next steps, as my staff report outlines, would be the development of a parkland acquisition strategy that would be brought back to council and include some large and broad considerations for how the town might want to approach dealing with this. And that's it. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. Appreciate your detailed presentation and the slides. And that's a gorgeous picture of that park. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for this great presentation. Very informative. Based on the findings, it appears that we're deficient number of areas. We don't have as much parkland as we might have, where we don't have the financial resources to acquire parkland, and I'm not going to repeat what you already said. But it appears that the solution is to acquire more parkland, and I'm wondering if perhaps there's another avenue, and that is to look at some of the areas that we entitled green spaces that are basically flat plots of land without any amenities. And if we put some energy and money into outfitting those parks with even basic amenities, would that not have some beneficial effect on the dearth of parkland that we're confronted with?
Through the mayor to Councillor Novak, yeah, absolutely. I think intensification of parkland is one solution where, you know, if you look at some of the, sorry, the clicker's not working, but thinking back to that, the pink map that shows proximity, if you think back to some of the parks there that, you know, might provide good proximity, some of those parks don't have, like, I mean, the Rose Garden's a good example. It's a very nice park, and the Parks Department does an amazing job making it look fabulous, but some aspects of it are not suitable for some types of people. So, you know, there's no small child sort of play equipment there. So that's absolutely one potential method of increasing the availability of recreation opportunities for sure. And you know, it does have an impact on proximity as well, where you know, you might have a park that's close by, but if you want a park that has a swing set and that's not in that close by park, you might be walking a significant distance. So yes, in some cases that's a potential option. In other cases it might be a little more complex, and you know, especially in some of these gap areas where you know, the lack of a nearby park space and the park that is close by doesn't have those amenities, you're sort of into a situation there where, yes, you could address it to an extent, but not to the degree that I think might be shown in the analysis here in terms of providing that park within that distance.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of get that, but I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't included as a possible recommendation as a way to mitigate these things at a much lower cost than acquiring a lot of new parkland where you have to start from scratch, or at least partial, maybe not 100%, but.
Yeah, and keep in mind too that this study is intended to only look at parkland. So we already have the Parks Master Plan that does look at all of the infrastructure within the existing parks. going beyond that, though, this study is specifically intended to look at what are those gaps, and then long-term, what are the options for making sure that, as the community continues to grow, that there's sufficient green space. So it is somewhat one-dimensional in that it's just looking at the parkland piece, and the infrastructure ideas in terms of playgrounds and other facilities, that's all in the Parks Master Plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I'll turn to Councillor Duck and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. I appreciate your presentation and the information provided. Just a quick question. Are community gardens considered part of parkland lands?
Community in terms of,
So if you are providing space where people can come and grow vegetables and flowers and that, is that part of a parkland acquisition, or is that a separate entity altogether?
so the way that, through the Mayor to Councillor Duck, the way that these parkland needs assessments or the subset of them in a Parks Master Plan typically look at this land, it's just any municipally owned parkland would qualify. So yes, if it's being used as a community garden and it's municipally owned land, then it would definitely be included in this type of analysis.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duck. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if, maybe it was in here, but there's so many charts and ratios and things. Whether we did a calculation with the, hectares per thousand that included the North Saanich parks that are in some cases literally across the street from us. So I'm thinking of like Rotary Park for North Saanich, which is right across the street from Sydney, which a lot of people on the west side and other areas take advantage of. And also North Saanich Middle School, which it sounds like that kind of area has a gap there, but that's a huge green space there. And of course, Blue Heron just down the road. So I'm just wondering if we take those into account, or have we? What does that ratio look like?
Yeah, through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. So what we tried to do, I guess the short answer is generally no. Rotary Park, we did some analysis on because the town does help fund that park. But it's also a very specific type of park where it's for baseball essentially. And it's not available to the public, so it wasn't included for that reason. What we tried to do with this analysis was follow the way that all of the other reports of this nature in other municipalities had been done. And generally they either don't use other municipalities' parkland for their analysis, or they break it out into sort of separate categories. Sydney, and quite often that's what they do with regional, provincial, or national parks, is they have sort of a subset. Sydney doesn't have any of those three types of parks, obviously. We did break out the school district sites within Sydney as that separate subset, but generally what we found with other reports of this nature and trying to stay consistent with that was that no, the adjacent municipalities' parks are generally not included. So no, we didn't do that analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one more. Actually, building on Councillor Novak's earlier point about other green spaces and things. And the report did mention like our green space out here in front of Town Hall, and that it's not officially a park, of course. It's our front lawn, but it's kind of started to become used by downtown residents as a park. So is that a possibility that we could incorporate that as part of our parkland, and whether it's putting a few tables, picnic tables out there, or that sort of green space. And so that one, and then also I'm thinking about, would there be any the green space that runs between Lochside and Bowerbank, where we're going to be having the new bike path, and there's quite a bit of green space along there. And actually I was thinking that might be a good place for community gardens too. I don't know, are those options to consider?
They could be. I guess, so looking again to, I guess best practices for this type of assessment, what we found is that municipalities include official municipal parkland, and that's it. And other land, you know, yes, might be sort of de facto used as a park, but generally there's very specific legislative and legal mechanisms that protect park as a specific type of land. And once park is dedicated as park, there's a very to turn it into not park, you need the approval of the electors and all that. So I think it sort of lends it a special status, whereas typical land might, you know, if it's owned by the municipality, it could be disposed of fairly easily. There's less of a less onerous process to do that. So I think that's the reason behind these types of reports only using official municipal parkland for their analyses. At least that's what we've found. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, for your presentation and the report. It's well done, and I appreciated the information in there very much. Would it be fair to say that I think, in my estimation, and I'd like to hear your take on this, that expanding some of our green spaces into actual parks would be difficult based on their size, because some of them are pretty small. So would that would be a challenge in itself, would it not?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, I think it really depends on the type of equipment or infrastructure you're wanting to put into a park. I mean, we do have some quite small parks with some limited infrastructure in there, you know, and I do think that a compact community can probably be pretty creative about how some of these small parks get used. And again, this report is not intended to look at sort of the intensity of use of parks. It's just an overall assessment of park land. And I think, you know, this type of report is intended to take a long view in terms of, you know, growth is going to continue in the community at around 1% a year, you know, projected for the next several decades. And, you know, as the community does get more dense and more populated, it's about looking to the future and making sure that there's sufficient land for that type of green space and park use. And beyond that, I think, you know, you look to the Parks Master Plan to talk about, okay, we've got that park, now how is it going to be used?
If I may, you speak to funding structures are inadequate. One of the things you mentioned, what if you could sort of expand upon legislative limitations on acquiring parkland and what that looks like?
Right, so the Local Government Act, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Verhagen, but the Local Government Act essentially requires parkland dedication for subdivisions that include the creation of 4 or more new lots. That does happen occasionally in Sydney, but generally Sydney's subdivisions create only 2 lots, and so we don't have any opportunity through those subdivisions to create new parkland. So we do get, you know, a fair number of subdivisions a year. In another municipality where you might have more land or bigger parcels, you're going to see parkland dedication with each of those subdivisions, and Sydney doesn't have that opportunity just because of the nature of most of our subdivisions.
Yeah. I think Mark Kinch was probably the last one that was sort of like that.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Just 2 more questions, if I may, and it speaks to sort of reference to the new provincial legislation. And when we looked at the, when you looked at the using the OCP as a guide for expected population growth and distributing it across neighborhoods with the growth potential method. So given that the OCP will have to be amended based on whatever legislation comes down and land use will change in certain areas, do you think those changes will impact the information that you were able to draw in this report?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I do think they will to an extent. I do think we will still see in Sydney continued development in the downtown and planned development in the west side. I think some of that development might go out to the peripheral areas as these fourplex type of projects. I think the real question is actually whether this legislation will lead to an overall higher growth rate and higher population. And that maybe has yet to be determined. If it's the same population as projected and we sort of stick to that 1% a year growth rate, I think some of that growth will definitely go into the outlying areas. I don't think a whole lot of it, just a gut feeling. If we get a higher population overall as a result of that new housing, and you know, and Sydney had quite a few new units between 2018 and 2022 constructed, and all of those units were occupied, and I think we probably had a higher growth rate as a result. If that type of situation happens, then you know, you could see the same amount of development in the downtown and west side, and just additional development outside of those areas as well.
And last question, thank you, Mayor. With regards to the supporting policy under recommendation 4 and property acquisition opportunities, and it ties into the legislation again, prioritize the acquisition of small pocket parks with new development in order to mitigate the impacts of increased densities. Do you see, like, I know you mentioned the fact that with the legislation in terms of how it's difficult for us to have, but the pocket parks, I wonder how difficult, or if you could speak to how difficult that might become on this potential for growth based on what the legislative changes might look like. And if in particular in specific neighborhoods where there isn't parks, if we have those kinds of legislative changes, will that really make it extremely difficult to create pocket parks?
I mean, first of all, I think pocket parks are definitely challenging in Sydney in the first place, just because generally the lots are quite small here, and so carving off a piece of green space from an already small lot can be a challenge. I mean, you look at the Mark Hinch subdivision, where I think it was 16 units or something around there were created, and we got a fairly small, I would call it a pocket park, from a 16-unit development. So if you're talking like a single building or maybe, you know, a smaller subdivision, very difficult. I also think there are some implications in terms of what the province is clearly moving towards a pre-zoning and less of the need to rezone over the long term. I think they've indicated that they would like to see some pre-zoning following the adoption of new OCPs, and that will make it more challenging as well to acquire park without that discretionary power through the zoning change.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gurnett. I do have 3 questions. The first was, Mr. Newcomb, you did touch on the targets, and I guess the question was not so much the percentages, but in those targets for a municipality, the 4 levels of park, a national park, a provincial park, capital regional, or a CRD regional park, would all count towards the Parkland, that number? Percentage?
Generally, in other municipal documents that we've seen of this type that we've referenced in developing this document, no, they don't, or they're broken out separately as always considered as sort of a supplement to the core municipal parkland. Kind of a nice to have is sort of the way I'd characterize them. But generally, because the intent of these documents are generally looking at, does the municipality itself have sufficient municipal parkland, and is there a need to acquire some in the future? Maybe, maybe not, but the focus is always on municipal parkland.
Okay, that's helpful. And appreciating we don't have those other types of parks in Sydney. But if we did, or if a municipality like North Saanich does, if they were presenting a report like this, they would, as you broke out the school district parkland associated with Sydney Elementary and Green Glade, you broke it out separately and showed what small incremental increase. Yeah. In their presentation, say in North Saanich, they would then list those other levels of parks separately from the true municipal. Yeah,
absolutely. Those types of parks are always included, but typically listed as separate categories along with the school district parks.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. My second question is on your the community comparisons. You mentioned that communities that were selected are based on having at least one factor similar or same to Sydney. And North Saanich's population is almost identical to ours. Is there a reason that that they weren't shown as a comparator?
Likely due to the geographic size difference. It's been a while since we talked about the rationale behind the selections, but yeah, likely due to the geographic size difference and just the different context in terms of Sydney's quite an urban community, and so we looked for somewhat urban communities like Sydney, or with sort of downtown cores and that type of thing, and likely it just wasn't similar enough from that geographic or development perspective.
No, understood, and that sounds reasonable. I guess that was actually one of the reasons I was interested, is it is a different type of community, and I'd be interested to know what Parkland they have, but thank you for that. My third question is with regards to the recommendation, and we're gonna get to that later on the agenda, so it's not about that. Actually, I will leave my question until then. So I'll wrap my questions there. Is there any further questions for Mr. Newcomb? Thank you again very much for the presentation. Council, we are now moving to committee reports, and the first under 5A is the Advisory Planning Commission, and we're receiving their minutes of the December 5th meeting as part of our agenda. We don't need a motion to move forward on that. Just before turning to Councillor Rintoul, our liaison to the Advisory Planning Commission, I'd like to turn to Mr. Humble, please, to speak to a little bit of process with regards to these applications.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is information for both the public as well as council that this rezoning that's before council is subject to the new provincial housing legislation. So I'm referencing Bill 44. That's the Housing Statutes Amendment Act. So as such, the town is prohibited from holding a public hearing on rezoning applications that involve a significant residential component and are compliant with the official community plan. So this rezoning applies to both of these elements. Furthermore, the legislation requires that municipalities provide notice to the public indicating the following: the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment, the lands that are the subject of the bylaw amendment, and the date of the first reading of the bylaw amendment. So this means that notification must be provided prior to the bylaw actually coming forward. So it must also indicate the place where and the times and dates when copies of the bylaw may be inspected. So those are some of the details associated with the new legislation. So it's important that council and the public are aware of this prior to receiving Advisory Planning Commission's recommendations. It's anticipated, if this advances beyond this evening, that the amending bylaw will come forward to council sometime in January. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. We appreciate that update. And so I will now turn to Councillor Rintoul to walk us through the recommendations, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And for information, I'm going to move Part 6 of the APC recommendations separately for discussion purposes. With that in mind, I will, the Advisory Planning Commission recommends, and I so move, 1, that staff prepare a zoning amendment bylaw in relation to zoning amendment application number RZ100107, and that the bylaw be brought before council for consideration. 2, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 2060 White Birch Road be notified regarding development variance application number DV100350 to reduce the minimum setback for parking spaces adjacent to the eastern lot line, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of the approval of the variance. 3, that development permit application number DP100841 to approve the form and character of a 4-story multifamily development consisting of 60 units be brought before council for consideration of approval if council adopts the zoning amendment bylaw and authorizes the issuance of development variance permit. 4, that as conditions of approval of development permit application number DP100841, the property owner shall, prior to issuance of building permit, A, address design guidelines number 24.4.24-31, bird-friendly design, 25.3.33, integrating mechanical screening, and 25.3.35, emphasized main entrance, to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services. B, register a restrictive covenant on title for the property prohibiting the future owner or strata council from passing any bylaws that may restrict occupancy of the building based on age. C, register a flood hazard covenant on the title of the property referencing the submitted engineer's report. D, place tree protection fencing around the protected Douglas fir at the southeast corner of the property and ensure that a certified arborist be on site at time of excavation. E, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development. 5, that is conditions of approval of zoning amendment application number RZ 100107. The property owner shall, prior to issuance of building permit, A, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 120% of the estimated cost to construct off-site works and services in order to improve the full road right-of-way width of the eastern terminus of White Birch Road. B, provide a statutory right-of-way in favor of the town of Sydney, registered on title to allow for public access along the waterfront marina side of the property. And C, pay to the town a bonus density payment calculated from the maximum base density to the RM5 zone.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I will note that I think this is fairly depicted in the minutes and the record decision, the Advisory Planning Commission meeting, that the APC members were very receptive to the project. There are some notes in there. I think in particular during the discussion that they highlighted what they liked about it, and they broad consensus from APC to see this move forward. So I think I'll leave my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'd like to concur with Councillor O'Toole that APC found, in general, everything acceptable with moving this forward. So I think we're ready to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you. Just a couple questions. First of all, I recall when we last saw this, that we referred this to APC, and there was to be a parking study done prior to it going to APC. So has a parking study been done? And I'm wondering what the results of that showed.
So I can comment at least that was provided to APC, and perhaps if you don't mind, Mayor, just yield to staff for whether or not they'd like to do a summary on that report or circulate it at a future date to council. Thank you.
I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, we did receive the parking and traffic study from the applicant in advance of the Advisory Planning Commission meeting. The report was posted to the town's website last week, so it was available for a week now on the Active Development Applications webpage. The report does find that the proposed amount of parking on site is suitable to the type of development. It also meets the town's bylaw requirements, as was noted in the report to Committee of the Whole and to APC. There's a surplus of parking spaces on the site over and above what the town's bylaws require. It also found, excuse me, it found that the road design was suitable and that, in conclusion, the development would not have an impact on traffic on White Birch Road. It says, in short, the development does not significantly change the traffic situation on White Birch Road. No recommendations in terms of road design for the proposed development.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Was there, I recall one of the concerns from residents was people cutting through the development there off of White Birch to get out to Rest Haven. Was any mention made of that, or ways that we might mitigate people from doing that sort of thing?
Thank you again. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, it did look at road widths in the area and traffic speeds in the area and found that speed was not an issue. So the average speed in the area was 27 kilometers an hour. 85th percentile speed was 34 kilometers an hour. Perhaps Ms. Clary could comment more on that, but no,
Okay.
it didn't see any problems
Okay.
in that area.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
thanks. And I did have another question. Maybe it's to Councillor Rintoul. In the record of decision, they made reference to the 2020 BC Handbook for Accessibility should be further reviewed as design proceeds. If you recall any of the discussion around that.
Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. To Councillor O'Keefe, a member of APC made reference, and I know staff reported that as this project advances, that certainly the project prior to issuance of a building certificate would be vetted through, you know, any required legislations, including the referenced guidelines, as I recollect. But I'll yield to Ms. Verhagen to ensure that I haven't inaccurately recollected that discussion.
Ms. Verhagen?
Thank you. So after the APC meeting, I spoke with our senior building official, and he clarified that accessibility handbook that was referred to during the Advisory Planning Commission meeting by the member is a guide on how to interpret the requirements in the building code. It's not additional or optional requirements for people to consider. It's an explanation of what the code requires. So, and because of the Building Act that passed a few years for the province of BC, the town can't require anything over and above what is required in the building code. So, as we stated during the APC meeting, when the building permit application comes in for this development, our building inspector will be looking for compliance with the code that is in effect when that building application comes in.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Gurnett, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, and I can confirm being an active or a regular visitor to our active development page that I did find the traffic study on there, and I don't specifically remember any reference to see when the road that cuts through. I don't remember that being a part of it, but it's a good read. Go take a look. And thank you for staff for putting that up, because it is nice to have that information. I just have one question, and with regards to conditions of approval of zoning amendment. As I recall, in past iterations of what staff has presented as options for council, there was a reference to rental as a housing agreement portion of a potential for. Will that be something in conditions that staff may or may not bring forward?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, no, that's not proposed as part of this development application. We understand from the applicant that is not feasible on their end, so I think that would limit the potential of this development happening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just circle back to Councillor Gurnett's last question and through to Ms. Verhagen. I think my recollection of that specific discussion with the applicant in attendance at Advisory Planning Commission was similar, that yes, it's a challenging environment now in which to do this as a 100% rental project. I guess my question through to staff is that if council had an appetite to revisit that issue or set a minimum threshold of rental units, if not all of the units as rental units, is there capacity in this process for council to introduce that, and at what stage should that occur?
Thank you. If council wanted to add a condition of the zoning approval, now would be the time to add that in as a requirement, because we would be drafting a bylaw to bring back to council for consideration, and that would be a part of the bylaw. So if that is something council would like to see, that would need to be considered by a resolution.
And just for process, if I may turn to staff, that could be an amendment to the motion that's on the floor. It could be a motion arising.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. And I would say that if council is going to be considering this, that it needs to be fairly prescriptive, I think, so that there's a clear understanding when staff are crafting the bylaws in terms of what percentage of potential rental, or what are the terms of the rental, etc.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Humble. I think given the nature of the possible amendment, I would suggest that it'd be a motion arising if council so chooses. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to my previous comment about what was indicated at the APC meeting. My recollection, and we'd have to watch the video of the meeting to be sure, was that the applicant indicated that they're not closed to rental, but they may not be wanting to be limited to only rental. Just given the nature of the building being there, this size and type of building would likely be there for many decades, so it's hard to say over the lifespan of the building whether they would do it as a rental or sell the units individually, but That was my recollection of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I just asked for clarification. Sorry, you had the floor, Councillor Garnett, but I just have. No, I'm okay. Sorry, Councillor Runtoul was speaking to one of your points, and fine, that's fine. Can staff please clarify what the applicant's intention is with regards to rental or not?
If possible, could we ask that question of the applicant?
Okay, so
Thank you.
Council, I would make an exception to allow our guests to speak this evening. We should have a motion just approving that.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to allow our guests to speak, address council. Please come forward, Mr. Lindholm.
I think we need to vote on that, Mr. Mayor.
Or sorry, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries. Sorry, Mr. Lindholm, could you speak to the question that I
will, yeah,
directed
and
to
thank you
staff?
for the opportunity to do so, because it's, I appreciate that this is a rare opportunity in these circumstances. The fact of the matter is that when we first undertook to do this building, now some 2 years ago, interest rates were 2.5% less than what they currently are. CMHC financing was available, and you might think, well, wait a minute, now CMHC financing is still very much an active program, but now, unfortunately, for the developers, is that there's now a huge demand for CMHC financing because they're making it more available. The trouble is there's only so much money, and so now we are competing with virtually every development organization across Canada for CMHC financing. And where we were before in a special category, now we're no longer. There's just now thousands of applicants, which also means that the turnaround time for CMHC financing approvals is just, it's indefinite. We don't know. We made application for this particular project in June, and we're sort of somewhere in the pile, don't know. So that's uncertain. Plus the fees for getting CMHC financing have gone up dramatically, so it's not as attractive as it once was. Also in this period, the cost of construction has gone up a staggering 30 to 40% in some of the major materials. So the whole viability of it as a strictly rental building is frankly not there. Now, we are somewhat unique in that this is a family organization, now two family organization, Alstons and Lindholms. We really want to have it as a residential rental property. We're not against the concept. It's just that if it's mandated, it may make it unviable, and therefore it doesn't happen. And now you have zero. So, because we are in a happy position that we can continue to operate a marina and have a parking lot. We don't want that. We'd like to have some housing. You just heard from high-tech people sitting right here saying we will need to provide housing for the high-tech people we want to have come and help the economy of Sydney. You can appreciate too that the province is moving towards mandating residential building, whether you like it or not as a council. And whether you like that particular methodology of providing housing, I just ask you to consider, don't make it mandatory. We will look at the opportunity to have some or all of it as residential rental housing when we get to the point of actually being in the receipt of an occupancy permit. We have a lot of uncertainty between now and then.
Okay, we appreciate you speaking to this, addressing this, and we understand that you are seeking to have rental accommodation as part of this project, but because of CMHC applications and other aspects of the project, that is uncertain at this time, and so council can consider that when we come to that, if we come to it after this motion on the floor. I will permit council to ask questions only with regards to the rental aspect to this property. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Lindholm, for taking questions. But the one announcement the federal government did make was that they would eliminate the GST from all new rental buildings. So
Yes.
how does that impact on your financial viability?
Well, it helps, obviously. I mean, it's a 5%, but that's only one small cost in the grand scheme of things. So yes, it assists, but it isn't one that's going to tip us over to and by the way, not just us, all developers are still, and again, I also don't like the term developers. We actually look at ourselves as home builders, home providers. But all of those people who are in the industry of providing homes will still have to go through the same arithmetic exercise of how much is it going to cost to build this thing, and is there any return at the end of it? And that, and that's a problem. That's a very significant problem, whether it's fee simple, strata, or rental.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Seeing no further questions from colleagues, thank you, Mr. Lindholm.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you being here. So, Council, we do have the motion on the floor with the recommendations from APC, as Councillor O'Toole has walked us through. Is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I will turn to Councillor O'Toole if to consider the sixth recommendation.
Thank you. The Advisory Planning Commission recommends, and I so move, for discussion the consideration be given to identifying several parking spaces for flexible use as an outdoor amenity area for general use by the residents.
Second.
It's moved in second, and I'll turn back to the mover.
Yeah, thank you. I will just express some concern with this particular recommendation. I recognize it reads that consideration be given, and that would, of course, default to the part of the home builder, I assume, or the strata in due context, in due time. However, I think this was born out of revisions to the proposal where previously there was a rooftop amenity for residents, and with that taken out of the project to address concerns, in part privacy concerns from neighbors, that APC, were curious about perhaps including other opportunities for public amenity space for residents, and recognizing that there were, as Mr. Hagan noted, an excess of parking spots in terms of what is required. I think somewhat creatively the APC suggested, well, perhaps those spaces could be used, if not permanently, occasionally, for amenity space. And my concern with that, I suppose, is twofold. Number one, I don't really know ultimately that's permissible for the strata to be able to do from a liability perspective, and the town, including this in turn, may have some exposure should there be an incident of some nature in a parking lot when it's being used for amenity space. And number two, maybe 3 points. Number two being the seasonal use of the parking lot with the marina there, and we would anticipate that parking demand would be heavier in the summer months when perhaps this could be used as an outdoor amenity. In my mind, this property is well adjacent to two, if not three, parks. Blue Heron Park in North Saanich, Lilienhofer Park in North Saanich immediately next door, as well as Resthaven Park in Sydney. So it seems to be fairly convenient to access outdoor amenity space, in my opinion. So I do have some concerns with this recommendation, and despite having moved it, I don't intend to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll turn to the seconder.
Yeah, I concur with Councillor O'Toole. I will not support this resolution. I think that one of the concerns residents had in the area was parking, and to take away parking at the outset is just going to, I think, cause a flare-up within the neighborhood. There are, as Councillor O'Toole indicated, a number of spaces, including access to the water. So I think this doesn't need to be considered, and I think the parking should remain the way it is. And it is at the discretion of the property owners to how that parking is assigned. So let's leave it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I have a question through the staff, and that is, my question is through myself to Councillor O'Toole. Was any clarification provided at the APC meeting in terms of what sort of, it says several parking spaces for flexible uses, outdoor amenity space, what they might be, what parking spaces might be used for as amenity spaces occasionally?
By my recollection, nothing specific, but I'll yield to either Councillor Duck or Mr. Hagan. I know there was a part to the question in which the suggestion was, should we make recommendations around providing infrastructure to those locations if they were designated. For example, a gas line if there were to be an outdoor barbecue there. And again, that further registered my concern with what's been suggested in part 6 of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Duck? Or, sorry, I'll turn to Mr. Hagan.
Thank you. My recollection from the meeting was that the discussion around the spaces that they would still be used as parking spaces, but as was indicated by Councillor Rintoul, some potential infrastructure like an electrical outlet or a different color paving or something like that, just to show that this area could be used for other uses over time by the strata.
Thank you. So I won't, not appreciating what the intended use would be better. I don't support this. I don't support this motion. Councillor Duck?
Just to add that, yeah, there was some consideration around areas adjacent to the marina office structure that, that could be used in conjunction with that, taking away parking spots there. But again, plenty of park nearby that would suffice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll confess that when younger we played ball hockey in parking lots, but I don't know if we need to have that within a recommendation. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We are unanimous in opposition. That motion is defeated. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor. There was some discussion of a possible motion arising. Does anyone wish to bring a motion arising forward? Seeing none, we'll close that item and move on to our next item, which is adoption of minutes. And I would look for a mover and seconder that the minutes of our regular council meeting on December 4th be adopted.
I move the recommendation that the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors or corrections, omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. I'm now turning to business arising from minutes under section 7 and from our regular council in-camera meeting on December the 4th. Council made the following resolutions with regards to citizen appointments. Number 1, that Todd Rayner and Harold Reisner be appointed to the Advisory Planning Commission as members of each for a 2-year term ending December 2025. Second, regarding the resolution was that Vanessa Pettinger be appointed to the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee as a member for a 2-year term ending December 25th. And the third resolution, that Karis Pinches be appointed to the Saanich Peninsula Water and Saanich Peninsula Wastewater Commissions for a 1-year term ending December 2024. And that is for information. We'll now turn to section 8, staff reports, and we'll come back under 8A to the Parkland's needs assessment. Mr. Newcomb, did you wish to speak further to your presentation? Thank you. Council, we do have a recommendation. I would look for a mover. Councillor O'Keefe?
I'll move the recommendation that staff develop a Parkland acquisition strategy and report back to council.
I'll second that.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder first.
Thank you. I do have comments. So I'm in favor of having a Parkland acquisition strategy. However, I don't personally see it as a big priority at this time. So while there's no disputing the benefits of parks in our community, I think we need to consider first how urgent a need this is, and second, in regard to the time and money required for acquisition, how does that rank in regard to other priorities we have? What I'm looking at is the recent flurry of legislation from the province related to increasing housing, and that's where I think our focus should be. So I would rather see our time, energy, and funds going into the development of perhaps below market housing before we would consider acquiring land for parks. In the last...
Sorry, I'm just going to interject there for a moment. Our motion is not prioritizing this. I appreciate you're certainly welcome to speak to it, but the motion doesn't contain that. And I just saw Mr. Newcomb's hand rise. If I could turn to Mr. Newcomb.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment that, you know, I think generally that the town is fairly well served with parks right now, and you know, there are some gaps and some, we are generally lower than other communities, but we do have many good parks that have a lot of great equipment in them. However, the Parkland acquisition strategy needs to be done in service of the development of the DCC bylaw. And the DCC bylaw sets the stage for the next, you know, 20, 30 years in terms of ensuring that as the community does develop, that there's sufficient capital to move some of these ideas forward. So the DCC bylaw is a near-term project, and because of that, this is a fairly near-term need as well. Thank you.
If I may,
Sure.
just because it pertains to your comments, would it be fair to say, Mr. Newcomb, that that with regards to the strategy, while there will be there are elements to the strategy already within the report, that the staff, as in many other areas of our community, are looking for opportunities, and sometimes opportunities arise to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just opportunities, but the DCC bylaw is a fairly large undertaking, and what's critical is making sure that the pieces that feed into that bylaw development are in place. So that there's multiple aspects where there might be other benefits as well, but primarily it's about the DCC bylaw and getting that moving.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. You did have the floor.
Yeah, so I guess just my point is, as I say, I agree that we should have Parkland acquisition strategy, but I think in the scheme of things, it's not something that I think needs to be done really soon, in my view. And when that comes forward, what I would hope that we would also see is some sort of update on the parks master plan. I know that that's a separate thing, but I think it's important when we're looking at acquisition to be looking at what is our current commitment in terms of parks for the next 5 to 10 years, and what do we expect those to cost. I don't know if now is the time to talk about priorities that we would see in that acquisition plan, or if that's something that we would have a chance to weigh in on when staff come forward with the acquisition strategy.
My general comment is that Council has an established process for strategic planning, and we make reference to planning documents, staff bring forward initiatives, and we have our budgeting process. And so as I say, it's not contained within this motion. It would be a motion arising, but we're not setting, and I'm not sure how we're going to set, by virtue of a motion, how this strategy is implemented at what level of priority. Perhaps you have something specific, but again, we do have a strategic planning process where I think we could speak to the prioritization of this as well as other plans and initiatives at the town.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like maybe the time to talk about where I see priorities in terms of where we would have those parks would be a discussion when that acquisition strategy comes forward.
I'm suggesting
Yeah.
we could speak to it further during strategic planning, but yes.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so sure, I'll leave my significant comments until that time. You can look forward to that during the next discussion.
Okay.
You're welcome, Chad.
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. The seconder was Councillor Novick.
Yes, I guess I've been lost in the shuffle, but that's all right. I support the recommendation for the simple reason that it is simply a development of a strategy, and it doesn't speak to times and budgets or priorities at this point. So we might be getting ahead of ourselves in looking that far down the path. I do agree with my colleague that it's very difficult to look at parkland acquisition strategy in an isolated fashion. And I do believe that in order for this parkland acquisition strategy to be beneficial, it has to be looked at along with the Parks Master Plan and the Parkland Needs Assessment. But I think all three are needed, so I'm quite happy to see that this recommendation come to fruition and that staff get ahead on the development of this strategy. From that point, as our mayor suggested, we can look at more strategic issues, either at strategic planning or at a separate meeting to talk about time, place, and money. But right now, I'm happy to see that the strategy gets off the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Councillor Gurnett, then Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And to quote a well-used expression in the UK, I think this is brilliant. Actually, I think the fact that we're even looking at it and getting it in play is important because of the legislation for the provincial government, which I feel is lacking in green space and parks in terms of all the development they want to see to come forward. So I think us doing this in relation to the DCC is getting ahead of the game and is being preemptive in what's going to be a problem in the future if we don't. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I think what Councillor Garnett has said about making sure this is done proactively, specifically because of the housing legislation coming from the province, is bang on. I would have anticipated staff would want to be doing this as they're working through the mountain of new legislation that they're going for, simply because we'll know that if we build something and forget to do this, or we didn't have the proper tools in place to do it, and then later realize there was an opportunity, if it's already built out, there's nothing we can do. Whereas if they have, staff will probably want to have that strategy ahead of time to make sure that as opportunities come up and as developments come up, because we know based on Sydney's already existing footprint that any opportunities we have are likely to be development based, like Mark Hinch Place, even though there may be not a lot of opportunities like that left. Those are the sort of things we are looking at. So housing strategy and the DCC bylaw are always going to be hand in hand with knowing what this parkland acquisition strategy would be. So I wouldn't think that staff would wanting to be delaying this or in some sort of discussion of priority to make it sound as though this would be something that should be shuffled off, because I think there's no way they can be doing this, a housing strategy, properly if they're not doing this at the same time. And that's what I will anticipate that they're probably looking at in terms of their own workflow and when we'll be seeing it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Seeing no further comment, I'll just comment from Mr. Newcomb's, one of his introductory remarks in his presentation is that, as I recall, that this was initiated because Council has had, within our strategic plan, brought forward by staff in the last term, to have a DCC review. And in doing the necessary work for the DCC review, it was prudent, as Mr. Newcomb advised us, to be doing this Parkland needs assessment. So I thank staff for the work that's been done, and I fully support the recommendation going forward. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And now we'll turn to item 8B, which is the 2024 Sydney Street Market Operator, and I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please.
Good evening. Sorry. The Town of Sydney issued a request for proposals for a new Sydney Street Market Operator in October 2023. 2 proposals were received, and staff reviewed them based on the criteria outlined in the RFP. Upon review of the proposals, KMAC Services ranked the highest overall, and staff are therefore recommending that the town enter into a new agreement with them for the operation of the Sydney Street Market. Mr. Humble, Mr. Hissick, and myself met with the proposed operator, and we're confident that they'll be able to provide these services to the town.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Gurnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple here, if I may. I know it doesn't speak to it specifically, but are we looking for a particular length of contract, or is that something that will come through the actual discussions with the proponent?
Through to Councillor Garnett, the idea was a potential 2-year contract, but the second year would be conditional based on the performance in the first year.
Great, thank you. One other, if I may. It mentions all the supportive written references and that we reached out to one. Would that be normal, or would we be an expectation that we would normally speak to more than one reference?
There were a number of written references with this proposal. We did receive unsolicited references for this particular company as well. So even though we only reached out to one of the references that were listed, we are confident that the community does support this group.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. A question through you to staff in regards to sponsorship. So one of the things that I found problematic in the past was the rebranding of our market with a commercial entity. So is that something that we will cover off in this new contract?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, we did discuss this. We brought this up with the potential market operator, and they were fully on board with running any ideas by the town in advance. So we'll be in discussions with them about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. And so I would look for a mover of the recommendation. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move the recommendation number 1, that council provide the Chief Administrative Officer of the authority to negotiate an agreement with KMAC Services to be the Sydney Street Market Operator based on similar terms to previous street market operator agreements, and 2, that the Mayor and CAO be authorized to execute the final agreement.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover.
Yeah, just sort of one little point. Leaving it all up to your expertise, but I noticed under one part in here that it mentioned to offer low or no fees to nonprofits, and I know from working with the museum that they were there every week last year, and they did have to pay a fee that was lower than other organizations, but I would be hopeful that they might be open to having our nonprofits not have to pay any fees, just because I think they struggle with their balances every year, and it would be, if they could have the opportunity to have contact with the community at large without having an added expense, that would be a preference I would like, just as a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to the seconder.
No further comments, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just another question through you to staff on the point that Councillor Garnett brought up in regards to nonprofits. Based on past experience, do we have an idea of the demand that there has been for nonprofits and the unmet demand? I remember last time, and maybe even the market beforehand, that it was sometimes a challenge for some nonprofits to get a spot. So I'm wondering, based on past experience and what you know the demand is there a recommended number that we could ask from the vendor that we want a minimum of, I don't know, 6 spots or 10 spots, or any thoughts on that?
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, I don't have a record of the demand for nonprofits. I do think the Sydney Street Market is a desirable place for many different businesses and not-for-profit organizations to put up a tent. So I think it's reasonable if council did want to set that, but we will work with the market operator. They were very open to having nonprofit spots, and as I mentioned, they already do have connections in the community. Just to answer Councillor Garnett's discussion about waiving fees, nonprofit, it is a bit challenging if you don't have any fee, because you raise the risk of a no-show, and then that creates a hole in the market. So it does have to be a bit of a balance, but we do hear that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe. Yep. Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. And we're now turning to item 8C, which is permissive tax exemption policy. I'll turn to Mr. Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This policy is being brought forward prior to next year's renewals to see if there are any amendments to the policy that council would like to see. So you have a detailed report in front of you that discusses the legislation we're working under, the current town policy, some of the organizations that are currently exempted. And you'll note that in consideration of everything, staff are not recommending any changes to the policy at this time, but obviously it's open to council to explore any areas that they would like to. In addition to looking at our policy, there is one redundant bylaw to be repealed, and there is a renewal process for the remainder that's slated to begin in early 2024 based on the outcome of tonight's policy discussion. With that, I'll open it up to any questions on the report.
Thanks, Mr. Hisik. I'll turn to colleagues. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. A question through you to staff. In regards to on the top of page 3 of the report, the review renewal process, and I like staff's suggestion about municipal purpose organizations not be subject to the more stringent renewal process, but that staff might take the opportunity to request some of those other organizations to provide letter of rationale. So is that already provided for in the policy in your view, or if we wanted you to start doing that, would we then make the first recommendation to amend the policy to include that?
It's already included. There's no need to make any amendment.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks for the question, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll move that staff proceed with the renewal process in 2024 under the existing permissive tax exemption policy, and that permissive tax exemption bylaw number 2218 be rescinded.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. We're turning to 8D, timing of the financial plan. Turn to Mr. Hisik.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. So in this brief report, I've recommended to council the timing of the upcoming budget process. Now, bear in mind, this is just a recommendation and there were alternatives provided. So if these dates do not work for council, we can certainly come up with some alternative timelines that do work. And once the dates are firmed up, the meeting dates will be advertised to the community.
Thanks, Mr. Hisik. We do have a recommendation. Councillor Duck.
Yes, and I so move the recommendation that the 2024 to 2028 financial process be scheduled be set as follows: January 29th, presentation of draft budget; February 12th, preliminary budget discussions; February 27th, final budget deliberations, special Tuesday meeting.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder. I'm not sure.
Nope,
Much
nothing to add.
discussion?
I think it's moving forward.
Okay, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. I will just note that I'm a little disappointed at the suggestion, the meeting on January 29th, and that, you know, we hadn't had a meeting scheduled on that date. I would have preferred to have seen this start set back to that. I will be absent on that night because we didn't have a meeting scheduled. That's fine. I know the business of the town will proceed in my absence. My question is through to staff: have we always scheduled a special Tuesday meeting? So we've got the Monday night meeting, I believe, on the 26th, and then we've scheduled a second meeting that same week on the Tuesday to further discuss budget. Is that correct?
Not sure that the table is being interpreted correctly. The introduction would be on Monday the 29th. The next meeting would be 2 weeks hence on Monday, February 12th. The special meeting on the Tuesday would be for final deliberations, which we typically do on a Tuesday night.
If I might perhaps clarify, Councillor Rintoul may have been referring to we will have a regular council meeting on Monday, February 26th. And I think the question might have been, is it normal for us to have a regular council meeting and then the special budget meeting? My recollection is we do, but I'll turn to staff.
Yes, that is the norm. That in the past, council has indicated a preference to not put it on a regular council agenda. However, if this council wishes for it to be on a regular agenda, I have no issue with that whatsoever. It's just, past practice has been to leave final deliberations for a dedicated meeting.
Yeah, that meets with my recommendation. Essentially, when I look at this, we're scheduling, 2 meetings that previously weren't scheduled in 2024. That's the 5th Monday in January, as well as this February 27th meeting. So I do have some concerns with this. Again, in part because I know I'll be absent for one of them, but that's fine. I can watch it on video and get caught up with Mr. Hissick on my return. But it is not the schedule in which I personally would have advocated for. So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Duck, then Councillor Novick.
Thank you. A question maybe to you, Mayor, or to staff. And what I'm wondering is, knowing that we're contemplating eliminating committees of the whole, possibly in the new year, and having extra council meetings, I guess I'm wondering, since we have more council meetings to make decisions at, could we do without the meeting on the 27th and just have a regular council meeting that deals with the budget?
I'll turn to Mr. Helm.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor. I think, we have to, council has to deliberate on that notice of motion. So a decision hasn't been made around that. I think it's premature to even discuss that at this point, quite frankly.
And these 3 meetings are a combination. The first is typically would be committee of the whole, and the next 2 would be council meeting, like a regular council meeting and a special council meeting.
Okay, and I'm flexible with the dates. If we wanted to push it ahead by everything by a month, I'm happy with that.
Sorry, by a month or a week?
Oh, sorry, a week. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I had next had Councillor Duck, then Councillor Novick.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rintoul. You raise a good point that it is the 5th Monday in January that we start this process. So as we move forward, typically we don't meet on the 5th Monday. So just, is there any consideration could that be moved up to the 22nd or later to the February 5th meetings? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll turn to Mr. Hissick and then I have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It could be moved up to a week earlier to the 22nd, if that is council's wish. I would prefer that if it were moved to a week later on February 5th, that we go with the alternative dates, because having 2 weeks in between makes more sense.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. If we did move it up forward a week, advance it a week, it would be at the meeting. The presentation would be at a regular council meeting. It would be at the 2nd regular council meeting of January.
I believe that is the case, yes. If council's okay with that, then it's not a problem for me.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just, sorry, I don't want to make a comment. Councillor Duck, you do have the floor. So we've had 2 council members speak to possibly alternative dates. If a council member, we do have one more person to speak, but after that, council member can certainly make an amendment to this. But I will turn to, if you're finished, Councillor Duck, I'll turn to Councillor Novick, and then I will have a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not unlike my colleague, Councillor Rintoul, I'll be away on the 29th as well, although I may be able to remote in, but that's iffy. And I'll also be away on the 22nd, so I would like to see it, the process moved into February as well, if possible. Thank you.
Okay, my only comment, and I'm hearing from council and anticipate a possible amendment, but we will note that we are not meeting the first Monday in the new year because of the statutory holiday. So we have one less meeting at the beginning of January. We would have had 4 meetings, and we would have 4 meetings in January under this schedule. So I will leave it to council if you wish to propose an amendment. Otherwise, we'll have further discussion. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a preference, just want to say that up front, but in terms of dates, but my preference would be that all members of council are present for that initial discussion. So if somebody has a date that works for all of us, that would be what I would respectfully like to see happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, thank you. If I may, through to Mr. Hissick, you've referred to an alternate suggestion for meeting dates. Did you specifically recommend alternate dates somewhere? Because I'm sorry, I'm not finding it here.
There should be a table in the report itself that has 3 columns, and the 3rd column is the alternative dates.
I don't see that in this draft, or this version of the report.
Could you share those with us,
Okay,
because we don't have that?
sorry about that. I just realized the report on the agenda does not have one of the tables that was in the
Should
original.
we forward this to next Monday?
It's fairly easy for me to, everything essentially gets delayed by a week. So introduced on Monday, February 5th. Initial deliberations on Tuesday the 20th, because that's the day after the Family Day holiday. And final deliberations at a special council on Tuesday, March 5th.
Councillor O'Toole, you had the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a motion on the floor, but my preference would be for the alternate schedule that Mr. Hissick just referred to.
I'm willing to accept that as an amendment, if so moved.
I'll second it.
Sorry.
Sure, I'll move that as amendment.
Okay, and we have it moved and seconded by Councillor Novick. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, staff. We'll now go to our motion to go in camera. Councillor Garnett.
Do we have to vote on the motion as amended?
Sorry, we voted on the amendment. We'll now call the question on the main motion. All in favor?
Thanks.
Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting personal information about identifiable individuals being considered for an appointment pursuant to section 90.1A of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. We'll start our